This is Greg Canty here, and welcome to the Win Happy podcast. Stay tuned for interesting chats with interesting people about winning their lives and being happy at the same time. This show has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. Thanks for listening. Just after we were all sent home at the very beginning of lockdown over 2 years ago, I recorded a podcast with business storytelling consultant and podcaster and my very good friend Paul O'Malley. This conversation captures brilliantly the shock that we were all feeling at the time, what we thought lay ahead, and how we were going to approach the unknown. We were to finish our conversation the following day, but I decided to leave it until the pandemic was over. Maybe it's time to do this now. Let's hear from Paul. Hey Paul, my good friend, how are you doing?
Well, Greg, considering the weather is terrible and considering the times we live in, I'm very well.
So I'm here with Paul O'Malley, who's the consultant storyteller at Show and Tell Communications. And you've got a lot of these keywords that come after that, Paul. You're a podcaster, a poet, a Toastmaster, a live streamer. And I know you were live streaming today from lovely Cork City. You were in the English market.
I was, and there's a live stream which involves me talking to Pat O'Connell about fish, and you can see him using all of his skills if you really want to.
Yeah, and actually Pat was a previous guest on the podcast as well. If you get a chance at all, he tells some lovely stories about him and his mum.
Lovely man.
I was delighted to see you streaming from town today. I think it was important that people saw that there was a city that was alive, people walking around doing their bits and pieces of shopping. So we're doing this on Saturday, the 14th of March. I think pretty much yesterday the government told everyone we shut everything. We shut schools, universities. It was a strange day. And in fairness to the Irish, we seem to have taken that on board. I woke this morning really, really early. I think the worry just kind of crept into me. But when you see that there's real life out there, it's kind of reassuring.
Yeah, I mean, it's a terrible time. I mean, leave out the health side of it, which is terribly important. But the effect on businesses is incalculable. I had real feelings when I was walking down Oliver Plunkett Street, looking at businesses to the left and to the right. I've got a favorite hairdresser on Oliver Plunkett Street. It's called Casablanca.
Yeah.
And they were cutting people's hairs. But I'd been thinking, well, look, I need a haircut. But is it safe social distancing for me to sit down with a hairdresser? And I thought, God, if I'm thinking that, and I'm not a very panicky person, what are a lot of other people thinking, and what's happening to their business?
Yeah, and I suppose we can be careful, when you're meeting people, but it's who the person you're meeting and where they've been. And in a way, it's the people that I meet after. My mum is in her 80s and she's in great health and everything. So more than likely, most of us will be fine, but you do need to kind of think about everyone else. Good friends of ours, they didn't want to come over last night because social distancing. And they were saying, yeah, what about your mother? And I said, okay, my son had a wedding today, one of his best friends, and up in Offaly, and he decided he wouldn't go. He's just staying with us at the moment. He's moving into a new place in a week or so. He decided he wouldn't go because of my mother, my daughter that's got an immune thing. And, we just need to be careful. So it's funny times. So we're at the beginning of a 2-week lockdown. I hope to God it's only 2 weeks. It probably won't be. Yeah, but you're right, Paul. That fear about business and everything. And it's a peculiar time of the year because, a lot of the retailers you're talking about, they're just coming out of January and February. I always kind of say that the year doesn't properly start until Paddy's Day. So here we are, and it's lockdown. That must be just punishing for them.
We could both, I'm sure, tell each other stories about particular businesses that are actually having no customers at the moment. I heard the man from what's that restaurant that they have, a restaurant in Limerick and a restaurant in Cork? It's they're down near the Irish market.
Corn store.
Corn store.
Yeah.
I heard him this morning talking on radio about the situation they have. A huge portion of their business is corporate bookings. So he was asked, and this was on the what I'm still called the Marion Finucane show, but he was asked by the man who was doing the questioning, and how has this affected your corporate business? And he said, it's all gone. And that was his bread and butter, all gone. And then the knock-on effect, the interconnectedness of, let's say, that business, then there are suppliers. The restaurant owner has a mortgage, presumably, on the business. What pressures are going to be put to continue repaying that? You get into a situation where some members of staff are renting accommodation. They can't afford to pay their rent.
It's high rent. A lot of them are just week to week at this stage, just hanging in there.
And the landlord is faced with, well, what am I going to do if I have no rent coming in? And it's an interconnected chain network. And I know that there are people who have been recommending to the banks or the government or whatever that they put up a very big fund from which people can draw down. And all I want to say, Greg, is that it's really tough times that we're talking in.
And it's funny, Paul, that we're talking in this way about what's going on at the moment, because I think when I met you first, we just hit that awful wall of a recession, 2009, kind of 2010, when it was near the same kind of a thing. I remember walking down the South Mall and the conversation was identical with everyone. How are things going? I was like, just don't talk to me. The big fear today is this uncertainty. Will it go beyond 2 weeks? The fear at that time was, are people going to keep on cancelling business? And when would it ever come back? I guess if you break it down, the fear at that time was a lot worse, really. The whole economy had crashed. There was no signs of anything recovering at all. But in this scenario, you do pretty much know that it will sort out, but I'm not sure how long people can last, because it's not a slowdown, it's a dead stop.
Exactly. I mean, the guy I work with, Roger Overall, in his company, Show and Tell Communications, I hope he won't mind me saying this, but very recently he told me, well, the news includes the fact that we lost 2 clients. And, I presume that these clients, I don't know who they are, that these clients have in effect just stopped spending money, full stop.
Yeah, you go into survival mode, don't you?
Yeah. Now, I was very insulated, I have to say. I mean, I've had a very, very fortunate existence. But when the crash came, I have in effect, for the most part, been a one-person business since 1998. So I didn't have any staff to whom I had to pay wages every week or month or whatever, so long as I could bring in some money to keep going.
Yeah, and like that now you're in a 2-person household.
Yes.
Or 2-income household, so at least there's a bit of cover there.
My wife was working as well. And, she wasn't made unemployed. If she had been made unemployed, we'd have had real trouble.
Yeah.
But, we all know what it did to people. And, losing a business is one thing, but losing your life is another. But these things where people, lose their livelihood, the knock-on ramifications are just huge.
Yeah. And I guess what we'll try to do during the course of this podcast is maybe try and help people in some ways to kind of see the positive. And this is the Win Happy podcast. And you know me, Paul, a lot of it is #positivity, even in those dark recession times. But I genuinely believe you need to look for the positive at these times. And there are opportunities to do things and to reach out to people. I received a wonderful email this week from KLM Airlines. The email said, dear customer, if you're thinking of booking a flight, be assured that we're a safe carrier. In the email, they gave a full A to Z of their cleaning regimes. And I mean in detail. They covered the food, they covered the cleaning routine within the cabin. They spoke about the air circulation that they have within the cabin, including this antibacterial thing, which deals with the COVID-19 virus. It spoke about the catering. It also said sometimes your journey isn't all about the flight. Other things could happen that would mean you couldn't take that flight. So there was a big guarantee in the email as well that said, in this scenario, if that happens, don't worry about it. You'll be sorted. And there was a third part then, which was they reminded you of the history of their airline. You know, they're going 100 years, 33,000 employees, et cetera, et cetera. And I kind of thought, that's clever. Now, the big thing was they were writing to me as a customer. I think I flew with them once.
Wow.
So they took the opportunity to reach out to their database of customers to say, listen, we're a really, really superb company. We've been doing this for a long time. We operate to the highest standards and you can trust us. Now, I'm sure in no time, maybe it'll be 2 months down the road and we're all thinking about getting up and running and taking those summer holidays or whatever. And maybe it'll be a bit longer, but KLM will definitely be on my list. And maybe it is a time that we can reach out to people, use the time that we never have ordinarily. Yeah, what am I going to do with this time now as a business person? What am I going to do with my clients, my customer base? Can I help them, and can I help them in ways that are a little bit different than before?
Just given me an idea, Greg, that I must ask myself and I must with my business partner, Roger Overall, we must consider what we can do. Because what you've just outlined to me strikes me as that's what every business should be doing.
Yeah.
That now, okay, they got resources. They had enough seriously interested people to think through what they were going to write. Big companies can do that. They have the resources. They have agencies who will draft something for them and they can then tweak it. But that example letter you got from KLM, that's in the public domain now.
Yeah, I did a blog post about it and we're talking about it today. Yeah.
Right. Any hotel in Cork, just to pick Cork, because we both live in Cork, can take that email and say, let's adjust this email so it comes from us.
Yeah.
They don't have to hire an agency. They have a
they don't. Yeah.
And, you know, that's a thing that one of my passionate interests, and it does come from my childhood, is customer service. And, you know, I'm one of these people who kind of says, I don't want the excuses for what you can't do. I want people and myself to think about how we can get around this obstacle. And the obstacle may be in our own heads. How we can get around this obstacle in order to achieve what we really want to achieve, rather than be defeated by it. So the whole idea of how can we turn this awful experience to everyone's advantage? Now, that's a big challenge.
Yeah, it's a huge challenge.
And, you know, for example, let's take KLM. They may well have the age of their customers or of some of their customers. Now, it's possible. A hotel might have that. Some businesses might have that. So what's to stop them deliberately crafting something to go to everybody over a certain age to say, we're thinking about you? And they'd have to write it carefully. They don't want to alarm people. But they can say, look, we're thinking about you in particular. And in some way, they can say, look, you know, we're here for you in spirit and at some stage in the future. You know, without seeming to, some people do really crude things about taking advantage of other people's difficulties. But what you read from KLM really impressed me, Greg.
Yeah, and it's a unique opportunity, Paul. At this time, it's terrible and it's scary and it's worrying, but it will pass. We know it will pass. And in the middle of it, we have to behave in a particular way to everyone. And I think that's important as well. You know, that we respect the people who are under pressure. And sometimes it could be our landlord if we're under pressure and paying them. Sometimes it's our own teams. And, you know, I'm sure they're all at home worried, thinking, okay, what's going to happen next week and the week after and everything else.
You also have, for example, I mean, again, to pick Cork, a whole load of people who live in Cork, who work in Cork, but who serve people in Dublin, who go to meetings in Dublin. Like, for example, I know a guy who lives in Cork. He's in the Chamber of Commerce in Cork, but he also is a member of the Chamber of Commerce in Dublin. Now, the Chamber of Commerce in Dublin, can it not provide Zoom access to its meetings so that the guy in Cork doesn't have to go to Dublin? He can now stay in Cork and have Zoom access via Zoom or Skype, whatever online thing, and he can play a full part in the meetings, speak to the meetings, hear what's happening, play a responsible role, but he's doing it virtually online. Now, let's imagine the crisis is all over. Why would Dublin Chamber of Commerce want to completely dismantle their ability to enable people who live in Cork to come to the meetings?
And Paul, and maybe it's beyond just the people in Cork. It's the people in Dublin who are half an hour, 3/4 of an hour of a commute, parking up, money for parking. So your hour meeting doesn't have to take 3 hours anymore. It'll just take the hour. So we might think a bit creatively, maybe start forming some new positive habits, get a little bit clever about a lot of the things that we're doing, because we can't do them the way we always did. We just have to do them a little bit different for the next few weeks, whatever that looks like. And maybe some of those things would be a lot better. Okay, so Paul O'Mahony, I want to do a big rewind. Who the hell are you? Where did you come from?
Well, you know how people in Ireland always say, "Where are you from?"
Yeah, Mike Rennie would ask you that.
I could say that partly means, where were you born? Where were you living? And sometimes, it's usually, and where do you spend most of your time? But it also means, who are your people?
Yeah.
That this is a natural thing, because why doesn't matter at the moment. But let me tell you, I'll take it very conventionally. I was born in Limerick, in Ireland, the eldest of 6 siblings. And I grew up in Limerick, and I went to school at a day school in Limerick. When I left the school in Limerick, I went to UCD, University College Dublin. I was 7 years in Dublin at university, and then postgraduate, and did some work in Dublin. Then I went to London for the summer, stayed 30 years in the UK.
I'm going to hit your brakes there now, Paul, for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Were you a city boy or were you out in the country?
City, out on the Gaelic ground side of the city. Was born on a place called North Circular Road.
And what did mum and dad do?
My father owned a bookshop. And what did my mother do? Probably the easiest thing, and I'd have to go into it, would to say that some of the time she looked after her children, but definitely not all of it. And an awful lot of her time, she did what you would call social work, voluntary social worker. That was her. She spent a lot of time outside the home helping people who were not half as well off as she was.
Were you aware of that at the time? Did that come into your house?
Yes.
Okay. In what way?
Well, sometimes people who she was helping came to the house. Other times we went to the houses of people that she was helping. I'm talking about people who were living, Greg, in conditions, to a certain extent, for people who've read Angela's Ashes,
yeah,
there were people who lived in conditions back in those days, I'm talking about 1950s, 1960s, who weren't much better off than the people in Angela's Ashes. So I went to some of their houses, and the other things were just stories told at home about what she was doing.
Was she doing that as a volunteer, Paul?
Oh, yes.
Why? Where did that come from inside her? Why was she doing this?
I think it came because she had a religious conversion in about, let's say, about 5 years after she got married. And she was, as I remember the story, she was kind of challenged by a Jesuit priest whose views she highly respected. And kind of almost like, when these questions like, Greg, what are you doing in your life that means something really big. And that's not the words he used, but it was like that. And she took those words as a kind of call to review her life. She knew how privileged she was because we were well off. And she decided she was going to go and help people. Now, my mother's story is extraordinary. And, what she did, I could be talking about for a long time. But essentially, she put her heart and soul into helping working class people in Limerick who were as poor as anybody else.
And as a young child, observing that, what was your perspective on it? What was it, why are you doing this, Mum? How did you feel about it?
I felt it was normal, Greg, that people who were as well off as we were would help other people. Like, I give you another little example. I think it was the Christmas of 1956, immediately when there were refugees from Hungary in kind of FCA camp barracks outside Limerick. 3 of them came to our Christmas dinner.
Wow.
That kind of built up. She had a long amount of contact with the Jesuits, with a small number of Jesuit priests in Limerick. And I think if she was here today, and in a way she is here, she's had a huge influence on me. And I do feel my mother and father are both on one on each shoulder. But she would say, I think, that it certainly wasn't all her own doing.
What was her name?
What was her name? Claire O'Mahony.
Claire, okay.
Now, she would say it was the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And she would also give credit to those people. And also, she was particularly good at getting others to help as well. I'm pretty sure that she with some other people, set up the first communal laundress in Ballinacurra Weston in Limerick.
If you were wealthy, you had influence within Limerick society or whatever. So she was using that position, I'm presuming, to get all the people enrolled, was she?
She was, but she also had to borrow money from other people to sponsor it. And I know that she had relationships with the city manager, and she would lobby. Also, there's other one that she set up the first children's playground, again in Ballinacurra Weston, a part of Limerick which wasn't served by any facilities at all. And again, she found somebody to work there. So, this is, I couldn't underestimate the subliminal impact that this had on me. She had, to the end of her days, a very strong religious faith. Again, I think that coincided with when I said she had a conversion. She wasn't always religious, but she did, and that fitted in with the other thing. And I'm an unbeliever, though I haven't turned out to be what by anybody say, a loyal member of the Roman Catholic Church. No, but I have always been able, with my mother and anybody else, to discuss religion. I used to say to my mother, she'd say something like, Paul, pray for me. And I'd say, Mom, my every step on earth is a prayer. My very presence is a benediction.
Did she buy that, did she?
No, she heard me and she just literally smiled. My mother was never somebody who would directly try and change your mind.
Were you proud of her at the time and what she was doing?
Yes. I think I didn't know everything that she was doing, but as time went on, I got to know more and more. And not just me, all of our extended family are proud of our mother.
Yeah, fantastic.
Greg, I'll have to go and pick my daughter
No.
up.
I was gonna literally instruct you to do that. Do you want to pick this up tomorrow? Because I know you're on family duty now.
Yes, I will pick it up tomorrow. Would love to do it tomorrow.
Part 1 was enjoyable. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a million, Greg.
Take it easy. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for listening to part 1 of this podcast. I'm going to catch up with Paul now to see if he's ready to continue part 2 years later. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.